start. Good?
Hello, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'll give everyone a sec to get settled and we'll get started. I'm Joyce Kennedy from People and Pollinators Action Network, and we're so happy to be hosting this event here tonight along with the Boulder Library. I just want to thank our partners and hosts, City of Boulder, Non-Toxic Communities, and of course a special welcome to our honored guest, Chip Osborne, who's here to speak to us tonight. I heard Chip speak about 25 years ago back in Connecticut. And I was so taken with his presentation and in meeting him, and that relationship has somewhat continued over the years, because when I did work in Connecticut, we worked to get pesticides banned from school grounds there. And so he was very influential in that, and his work has expanded across the country, working in many different states. He'll tell you a few more details about himself. However, just know he is, the national expert on turf management, so we're very lucky to have him. And we're also very lucky to work with him here in Colorado. We're doing quite a number of projects. He started working in the city of Boulder earlier in around 2009, he tells me. He has done and Chip has also led two wonderful pilot organic park projects in Longmont, and recently launched park pilot projects in Lakewood and Golden and Colorado Springs. And the reason Chip is in town, kind of exciting news, Boulder Valley School District is going to transition all their school properties to organic management. And so it's such a great vision for Boulder and the community beyond, and also our state. So, the overall dream, of course, is to have enough cities doing this work that other cities will join in. There will be shared learning. And of course, that can be a great model for our communities and what individuals are doing in their own yards. We continue to say, we prefer to have native turf or native plants where we can, but when we can't, we know we still have a lot of turf, and we want to manage it in the best way possible, in a sustainable, safe way for all. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chip, and just thanks for being here so much, Chip.
Thank you, and thank you, Joyce. My pleasure to be here tonight and talk a little bit about organic lawn care. I coined this phrase, a living lawn, a lawn for living, back in 1997 when I began my journey into this area. A little bit about me: I'm a professional horticulturist for over 50 years now. When I first started in 1974, pesticides were only 25 years old. I was in the greenhouse, garden center, nursery business, and I was taught that I couldn't manage any horticultural crop without a strong dependence upon synthetic fertilizers and chemical pesticides. And I did that for 25 years as a pesticide applicator, held a license, and my Saturday nights were spraying my greenhouse, the worst thing I had to do. When I first started, we were given products that were told, oh, they're not really any big deal. Safe when used as directed, which, by the way, is illegal for anybody to say. But that's what we were taught. There were degrees of toxicity. And we had things that came on the market that all of a sudden were gone from the market because they found out they were so dangerous. So that's where I started. Then by the mid-90s, I decided I'd had enough. And I moved away from all of that in my greenhouse, got part of it certified organic, and then moved forward and got active in my community. We passed the first policy in the United States to restrict the use of pesticides on public lands, and then for 20 years as an elected chairman of the Recreation and Park Commission, oversaw the management organically of all that acreage. And to this day, 24 years later, it's still organic and it's still as good, and we'll hold it up to any community around town, so that, around the region. So that's my history and sort of how I got here. And my reason for embracing organic in the public sector and private residences was my children. I had 4 children, and I was concerned that when they played on soccer, football, and baseball fields, that they were getting an exposure to pesticides, which I knew intimately from my hands-on work. So as we begin this talk, one of the first things that's so important to understand is we need to learn to embrace diversity. The expectations that we as a population have about our lawns, that monoculture of turfgrass, where no other species is acceptable, is an expectation that was created by an industry 75 years ago to sell product. It's as simple as that. We all know the story of World War II, excuse me, and how those products came to market, that the first fertilizers, ammonium nitrate, was a munition in World War II. And it became the first artificial manure, because now they didn't have to manure fields, or compost, or cover crop, because they could put down ammonium nitrate. Grass seed mixes prior to World War II contained white clover. Clover's a legume, we know that. It fixes atmospheric nitrogen, entirely beneficial. But the industry came along now and said, well, we have this product that's going to get that weed out of there. That's a bad guy, it's not a good guy. We need to get it out of there. They had a selective herbicide that's not going to hurt the grass and will get the weed out. So that was marketed. Then they just happened to have over here a bag of synthetic fertilizer. They're very happy to sell us to replace the nitrogen we just lost when we killed the weed. So that's where we got to 75 years ago. So that expectation of the monoculture of perfect grass was created by the industry, not by any of us. And so that's kind of what we're fighting against now. So my mission is to not only move away from synthetics into natural management, not just turfgrass, but the entire landscape, but begin to have a perception and a change in how we look at and how we manage. There's this kind of management here. You can see in the top left-hand part of that picture, there's some grass in there. This is a botanical garden in Delaware, and this is part of the beautiful landscape. And I did a review of all the grass in the property and developed management programs for 7 or 8 different areas. But here, the first thing I told staff was there can be no fertilizer here. It doesn't matter what that grass looks like. What you have to do is defer everything to that beautiful plant material. So there's weeds in there, there's different grasses in there, different kind of plant material in that lawn, but it's not managed. Up above in other parts of the property, it's more highly managed. So as a turfgrass guy and somebody that manages sports fields and high-end properties, a good part of our business is high-end property management, where expectations are off the charts, and we do it organically, and we're successful, but there's way too much grass in the world. And as a society, we're very guilty of putting grass where it doesn't belong. A lot of times from the landscape architectural perspective, grass is put in as a placeholder. So we know that some grass should go away, but some should remain. And that grass that remains needs to be managed in a chemical-free manner. Public parks, a reasonable amount of lawn around our residences, golf courses, sports fields for our children. All of that grass absolutely wants to stay. But there's so much grass surrounding corporate campuses and large areas of non-native turfgrass that don't need to be there. And I have properties where I go in and I just take out grass. One client had 85,000 square feet of lawn. She never went out there. She walked it twice a year with me. The rest, she just looked at it from the windows in the house. And I told her she had too much grass and we had to get rid of some. No, don't touch my grass. So one year I worked for her for 10 or 11 years managing that property. So one year I just got on my high horse and I went out and ripped out 10,000 square feet of her lawn and composted it. We walked around the next time and she said, something's different here. I said, yeah, you don't have that non-needed grass over here, and look at the landscape that you now have created and brought the woods right into your house. She goes, get rid of some more. So sometimes you have to lead people to water before you can make them drink. So now that we know where we are, that we need to move forward in a non-chemical framework, let me give you just 5 minutes of what I call Pesticide 101. All of these products in this picture are widely used. They're all found in the garden centers, all found in big box stores. They're all worked and used in turf and in the landscape. So all of this is, begs the question, are they safe when used as directed? Have you been told that they're no big deal? Have you been told that when a pesticide applicator comes and sprays some liquid pesticide on your lawn that you don't have to worry, because as soon as it's dry to the touch, it can't bother you? But now we know there's something called a half-life, where it takes amount of time for half of that active ingredient of pesticide to go away. So if the half-life of the pesticide product is 15 to 20 days, the fact that it's wet or dry makes absolutely no difference. So a lot of the industry that does pesticide applications isn't really forthcoming and telling you really what is going on. So we're looking to reduce and eliminate toxic pesticides, protect human health and the environment, protect pollinators, reduce and eliminate synthetic fertilizers, reduce inputs in general over time. We're trying to move to more low input, working with soils, working with specifically the biological fraction of the soil to get that soil more productive, mimic the natural nutrient and nitrogen processes that are in place in nature, and that's less that we have to put in and buy from the bag. So our goal in organic land management is to reduce inputs over time in general, because if we get soils and the landscape in a healthy condition, we don't have to go out and purchase as much. But that's not what the industry wants to hear, because the industry is basically about selling product, whether it's direct sales from a brick and mortar store, or whether it's the landscaper selling you that product and marking it up. A big chunk of the revenue comes from selling product. So, people ask me, well, these are all the reasons to move away, but what's the biggest reason that you don't want to use pesticides? Because I want the landscape to get better. I want it to get healthier. Pesticides are stress-inducing materials on plant material. We had, evergreen trees that got a particular fungus, and they were needle cast fungus back on the East Coast. I'm from southern Maine, so that's something that's very predominant back with our high moisture back there. And they were coming in twice a year, fungicide, fungicide, fungicide. And the tree got weaker and weaker and weaker, and the problem got worse and worse and worse. Treadmill effect. We focused on soil health, building the health of the soil, and all of a sudden, within 8 or 9 months, the needle cast came under control, because the fungicides themselves were harsh on the nature of that particular tree. So pesticide is an umbrella term for control products used in lawn care, agriculture, structural pest control. So there's a basic premise that pesticides are poisons, and all have some degree of harm or danger associated with them. It might be low, or it might be higher, depending on what that product is. By definition, they are substances that kill, repel, or mitigate a pest. Now, there are organic pesticides that we use in organic programs, but the organic pesticides that are allowed are derived from natural materials. They're not synthetically created in a laboratory. And then we have the US EPA, which is the regulating agency for pesticides, Environmental Protection Agency. But it doesn't say Human Protection Agency, right? So in some respects, we could say that the EPA is more protective of corporations than it is of us. And that's the reality. Huge corporate influence at the EPA. So EPA simply registers the active ingredient of pesticides. They don't register the formulation of the bag, box, or bottle. They register the active ingredient. All the testing that's done is done by the chemical manufacturer themselves, or with an independent third-party laboratory. Data is submitted to the EPA, have to take it on faith that the data is correct. The EPA evaluates it and then decides whether it comes to market or not. Something called risk assessment. If the risk outweighs the benefit, it doesn't come to market. If the benefit outweighs the risk, it does come to market. I've been fortunate over the years to go directly to the EPA in Washington and sit down in meetings with the Office of Pesticide Programs. And we have actually heard them say that, well, at the end of the day, we really think that we have a benefit to provide financial opportunity to the registrar. That's the corporation. So where does that come into benefit in risk assessment? But unfortunately, it does. It's important to understand that they register only the active ingredients, which are a really small percentage of what's in that bag, box, or bottle. The inert ingredients that are really the things in there that kick it up and make it effective, all protected by trade secret laws. We don't know what they are. The manufacturer does not have to disclose it. So there's the model of risk assessment, that framework that was developed in FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, and it looks at levels of exposure and then creates levels of acceptable hazard. We've had certain pesticides in the last 5 or 6 years that have come out to say that, well, in modern science and modern research, we really think that the level of exposure, here's what the EPA says, but the level of exposure is a little higher than that, maybe a cause for concern. So rather than go back and discuss any further, the EPA just raised the level of exposure. So now we're still under the level. So much that we don't know, so much that goes on. I won't go any more about that, but the fact is, so much that we're taught about all of these products. It's against FIFRA, the federal law, to say safe when used as directed. And the last little thing I'll say is that one of the products that landscape contractors use regularly is a 3-way chemical cocktail that kills 35 different weeds. So there's 3 different pesticides, 3 different herbicides, weed killers in that bottle. It's never been tested. No one has ever tested the contents of those bottles. All that's been tested are the 3 pure, isolated, active ingredients. Now you put 3 toxic chemistries together, synergistic effect, cumulatively that much more potent than what's there, never tested. Used every day by probably 80% of the landscape contractors in the country. So American homeowners, property managers, account for as much or more pesticide use than all of agriculture. It's amazing how much is used in quest of the perfect lawn all over the country. So one of the other phrases that I've coined over the years is an awareness through education. That the only way we can really understand what's going on and we understand how we need to change is to educate ourselves on what we've been taught in the last 75 years and how we want to move forward in the future and try to leave the planet a better place for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I've always believed that a more widespread adoption of organic land management practices is simply limited by the lack of education. I had a phone call the other day from a 3rd-year turf student at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Mass. Reached out to me because he had seen me somewhere online and he was interested in organic lawn care. And he wanted to pursue that as a career. And he said, I have never had one course in 3 years with anything to do with organic fertilizer, organic lawn care. I don't know how to do it. How do I reach out? Can you help me? And I said, well, that's not surprising. And the Land Grant University, I said, you do know why that's the case? Because the industry is funding the land grant institutions and all their research. So they're not going to fund them and then have them go try. I was hired at Rutgers University a long time ago to give an organic lawn care class as a continuing education, and I got fired before I ever opened my mouth. Because the industry went to them and said, if you bring this guy in here to talk about organic, it might cost you $1 million next year in funding because we don't want to talk. Rutgers has since, to give them credit, has moved into organic land care education to some degree, as sort of an aside to what they do. But, that's what we're at in the educational system. Just a couple of examples. That picture on the right, that's where I took out 5,000 square feet of her lawn, and I replaced it with that. Because they were forcing grass where it didn't belong. It was too shady. It was right next to the woods. So much prettier part of her landscape. The idea is that it can be done on small properties, large properties, and sports fields and everything in between. So we have natural, organic, sustainable, regenerative, all words that mean somewhat and similarly the same thing. The only word up there that has a definition is organic. Organic is defined in the National Organic Program as an act of Congress in 1990, and it states exactly what organic is. If we are truly managing organically and building healthy soils and focusing on healthy plant material, we are actually being regenerative. That is a regenerative approach. So they all mean more or less the same thing. I don't use the word sustainable too often because Bayer and the former Monsanto and companies like that say that they're the sustainable corporations that are charting the way to a sustainable future. And that's very contrary to the way most of us would think of using the word sustainable. We have developed over the last 25 years what we call a systems approach to natural turf management. When most places teach turf management, they're focusing on what you can see on the grass. And all the product input, calendar date, based on something getting the grass greener, getting it thicker, something to do with what we can see. Our systems-based approach is everything you see, but most importantly, everything you don't see under the ground. What is under our feet? So it's a strong focus on the soil biological fraction, understanding what's going on there and how best to optimize it. I've had projects where I've developed programs that the first thing we did was went out and aerated and sprayed molasses on the field. And that molasses bloomed out the microbial bacterial fraction. The predatory relationship in the soil ramped right up. Nitrogen was naturally produced just like it is all around here in our natural lands, the grasslands to the east and the mountains to the west. All of those natural processes that are in place. So my best understanding of how to manage is to just mimic what's happening around me and focus on that. And then the third part of the systems-based approach are the cultural practices, or the second part is the cultural practices, the things that we do culturally to enhance the system, whether we're aerating or watering properly, the different things that we would do that support aspects of the landscape. And then the third, and not third by accident, is the product that we put in. Because in our approach, focusing on the soil biome and focusing on the cultural practices are more important than the fertilizer bag that we might go out and buy. So we put this together and we operate under this framework. It's a transition process, so it doesn't happen overnight. It's not a product swap. We're not looking to identify something that is undesirable for fertilizer or a pesticide and switch it to an organic pesticide or switch it to an organic fertilizer. If we simply do that, we're usually going to fail. So if we manage it from a system and transition, then we will be successful. So when we put a plan in place, it can either be from property that's organic by neglect, meaning not much has happened, and soils may or may not be healthy, they may not be all turf grass, there may be weeds, or we can take a property that has had significant herbicide input, we expect it to be weed-free, and and then we transition it to organic. It does not get worse before it gets better. If we do it properly and follow that approach, we're always going to move forward in a positive direction. So during this transition period, say for a residential lawn, it might be a year and a half. For the sports fields and the public parks, it's a 3-year transition for the more heavily used property. But it's in this time frame when new products, cultural practices are adopted. And the most important part of the beginning when we start is the soil. The first thing that we do is put a soil probe in, and we pull out soil, we test it extensively, and then move on and develop a plan. We don't ever put product down without ever realizing whether or not it needs to be used. So we're removing synthetics. That's the first thing. We can't do it, a little bit in and a little bit out. You can't take away synthetic pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and continue to fertilize with inexpensive synthetic soluble fertilizer. It won't work. Those are salt-based products. Think of living organisms. Think of all those little microscopic organisms in the soil. And all of a sudden, if they're subjected to 3, 4, 5 applications of salt every year, they're not going to be happy and they're not going to thrive. So the salts and the synthetic fertilizers have to come out of the equation. We switch to organic fertilizers because organic fertilizers are actually food that feeds those microbes. So our approach is to feed the soil, and the soil in turn is going to feed the plant. So we end up having to move it that way. We address the soil and the grass simultaneously, and we work through that time frame. Then we factor in expectations. What are you looking for? Are you looking for high expectations, medium, low? Expectations can be just that, low, medium, or high. Cultural intensity is everything that goes into meeting an expectation. Labor, products, water, whatever we have to do to go there to meet that expectation. So we put that collectively, all those resources together. These pictures, 4 different pictures here, all projects that we worked on. Top left was in Michigan, right on Lakeside, where synthetic fertilizers were being used regularly, and probably a good percentage of that nitrogen was finding its way into the water. So that was transitioned out. It never fell backwards, it didn't deteriorate. Top right is a residential property, where that property was the large 85,000 square feet and was getting anywhere between 16 and 20 pesticide applications a year. And we reduced it to 1 application for a particular problem with a tree. 1 application in 8 years versus 17 or 18, 19 applications every year. Every tree, every bit, every blade of grass was getting sprayed multiple times. Bottom left is a large estate property where expectations are off the charts high. And we're managing it organically, and it's meeting the client's expectations. And again, it's all about the soil, all about focusing on healthy soil. The bottom right is in New Jersey, which is a community neighborhood park, and that's not a monoculture of pure grass. There's other things in there. The interesting part of that is we came in a pilot project following multiple years of one of the larger companies nationally that goes around and sprays pesticides and does that. And they still had weeds. It wasn't weed-free when we started. There was still non-turf grass species in there, but nevertheless, came in through organic, but they weren't patient enough. They didn't want to wait through the transition period. So after a year or a year and a half, the powers that be got to the people that put the plan in place, and that project ended because they just didn't have the patience to stick it out and see the benefits. Low expectations are not always bad, and high expectations are not always good. It's the right and appropriate expectation for the site that becomes the guideline. And internally, we have our own rules and guidelines on when and where product application can happen. You know, we're doing one now in Minnesota that's right on a lake, and there can't be any fertilizer nitrogen there. But we can put molasses, we can put humic acid, we can introduce biological organisms, all things that are non-leachable, that work directly within the biomass, and grass seed. And they will see a benefit. On their other properties, their higher profile baseball fields and soccer fields, we do use fertilizers, but we had to tell them right off the bat that this site is not going to be improved with the use of even organic fertilizers because it's not appropriate to have that close to the water. Lower levels of expectations can be met with lower cultural intensity, that's all the input, and that translates to a relatively low cost per 1,000 square feet or per acre. Higher levels of expectations can be met with higher cultural intensity, translates to a higher cost, and because it takes more product and more labor to do that. So one of the things that whether I'm talking to a homeowner or a large estate or a municipality, the first thing I want to know is what are you expecting to get out of this transition? You know, we have our own definitions. high expectation, high-end management is less than 5% weed pressures per acre. And that's pretty much what the conventional industry does, because herbicides are not foolproof. You still get breakthrough of weeds with herbicides, and companies that come in and spray herbicides for weed control generally have it in their contract that if weed pressures exceed 5%, they come back and spray again at no charge. So we will follow the same guideline as high-end management. Moderate management might be 10 to 15% weed pressures over a relatively large area. Excellent curb appeal, very healthy grass, but if you walk, you will see some weeds in there. And for so many people, that's not a limiting factor. And then low expectations is when weed populations, or what I call weed pressures, exceed 30%. Now you're getting into a situation that for every blade of grass, you've got some type of, non-grass plant material. And for a lot of people, that's not a problem. I can't tell you how many people tell me they love crabgrass because it stays green in the hot weather all summer long. Crabgrass, actually, an interesting story with crabgrass. Crabgrass was brought to the United States in the 1850s by the federal government because they were going to use it as a forage crop. It came from China. So it's a non-native warm season grass. It failed as a forage crop, and so now we have it as a warm season grassy weed that is in all 50 states. We have to think beyond NPK, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We have to think that less is more. Focus on the biomass. Embrace the concept of nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling are those microbes in the soil where we have a bacteria that breaks down organic material like an organic fertilizer or a grass clipping. A higher level organism known as a protozoa. You may have heard that, remember that from science class. The protozoa eats the bacteria. The end result is that protozoa releases the nitrogen it got from the bacteria as ammonium nitrogen, which is in our fertilizers. So organic fertilizer, bacteria break it down, the protozoa consume it, and nitrogen for the grass is released. And it's done every day and in relatively small amounts so that it's constant and steady. So that's, again, that focus on the biomass. With regular high rates of fertilizer, microbes get lazy and don't want to do their work because the fertilizers stifle them, the salts diminish them. So by pulling away synthetic salts and introducing organic fertilizers, we then begin to create that mimic of a natural system. Photosynthesis, something else you probably remember from biology class. When we look at this slide, see that plant food, lawn food, rose and flower food? I can assure you that there's absolutely no food for any plant on the planet in any of those containers. Because nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are not plant food. They're raw materials. So now when we understand the process of photosynthesis, we have energy from the sun, carbon dioxide and moisture in the atmosphere. We have a blade of grass or the leaf of a tree that's green, that's chlorophyll. When we put fertilizer down or the natural nitrogen from the soil, that grass blade stays nice and green. The green chlorophyll, microscopic openings on the underside of the blade of grass called stomata, open and closed. Carbon dioxide goes right inside the grass plant. Energy from the sun, moisture, and produces carbohydrate, amino acids, and sugars. That's the plant making its own food. It uses that food for survival day to day. In the crown of the grass plant, it stores it, so it has some resources during the nighttime when it can't photosynthesize, or during periods of extended cloudy weather when we don't have bright sunshine. And then 80% of all that food the plant makes goes down into the root system to drive the growth of the root, and half of that goes out into the soil as what we call an exudate, and it feeds those microbes and brings them right to the root of the grass plant, and the microbes then give the nitrogen right to the plant. So we have to understand that these fertilizers aren't food, they are just raw materials. And we have to know that we can enhance the process. Carbon sequestration, that's a big deal. This test here, we monitor soluble carbohydrates, soluble carbon. That's that carbohydrate that goes down through the root system and ends up in the soil. And we're tracking that in projects all over the country, from Florida to Arizona, Texas, out here in Colorado, California, all through New England, all through the Mid-Atlantic. Iowa, Michigan, tracking carbohydrate sequestration under the process that we're putting forth the premise that if we manage organically, we get a healthy plant, vigorously growing plant, a healthy soil biome, that we can sequester greater amounts of carbon through more efficient photosynthesis. The plants get healthier, the soil gets healthier, the microbes get healthier, and then we have that carbon as a long-term energy resource in the soil. So from the public perspective in a municipality, carbon sequestration now and sustainable community action plans, it's really a big deal. So we're tying that all in with our organic lawn care or natural turf management when working with a municipality for climate initiatives and carbon sequestration, the drawdown of carbon. So when much of the world is focusing on reducing CO2 emissions, we're focusing on taking the CO2 out of here and putting it down here where it's going to do some good. And that really is the solution, is to try to continually draw it down and build it as a soil resource. So a site analysis, we would walk into a property and we look at it. I encourage you to do that. Walk around your property, note the strengths and weaknesses of the property. Look at the limitations. Don't force grass where it doesn't belong. If there's an area where grass isn't doing well, in my own yard, I probably reduced my lawn area by 30% over the last 2 years, because every area that's a little too shady or a tree gets bigger and grass struggles, it goes away. I live in Maine and near the coast, and it's a woodsy environment right on the coastal plain, and if the grass isn't doing well, it goes away. And ferns come in the shade, or something else comes in the shade that's a native to my region of the country. So not trying to fuss over grass and make this grass perfect. If it's struggling, we give it a best shot to survive, but if it's not meeting expectations, it just goes away, because the grass at the end of the day is not that important to the landscape. We soil test. We test for soil chemistry, test for soil texture, sand, silt, and clay. We test for soil biology. So we're monitoring all the nutrients in the soil, the organic matter fraction, the makeup of the soil, and then the soil goes under a microscope. And we identify all the organisms that are there, how much is there in total, how much is actively working, and we develop strategies on what we need to do to support effective growth of the microbial community. So in our natural management approach, soil biology is at the heart of everything that we do. What is it? How do we best support it? It's collectively known as the soil food web, a term coined by Dr. Elaine Ingham many years ago to identify the relationship of all of these different organisms and how they participate in an active way in the soil environment. They create and maintain soil structure, the arrangement of soil particles. It's called niche construction. They create and maintain their own environment down there. We don't create it, they create it. We need to just best support them so that they can create it in the best way that they can. Plant growth, plant nutrition, disease resistance, mineral nutrient availability. Microbial life controls all of that. So once we identify what's there and how effective it is working or where limitations might be, then we can develop programs and create recipes to affect that and change it in a way that you might need to. A note on your soils here in Boulder. We're working now, as Joyce said, with the Boulder Valley School District. And we have pilot projects on 3 properties. We did this extensive testing on all 3 properties, and your soils are, how should I best describe it? Very healthy and in a very functional framework from both soil chemistry, texture, and most importantly, biology. So organic matter is well above the national average on all the properties that we looked at. Biological life, I'm used to seeing biological soil tests with all kinds of red in there, meaning deficient. Everything is black here. High levels of bacteria, high levels of fungi, high levels of protozoa, the higher level predators. So it's in place here. So your soils are very productive. We did a soil health test here, and on a scale of 0 to 100, for soil health and soil quality, the test at all 3 properties scored a 93. significantly above average for soils in this general geographic region. So so some of them are probably native soils, some of them may be engineered soils, but even an engineered soil begins with a native soil. So you have soils here that have good resources, as opposed to other parts of the country where we have soils that are really deficient. And we have to spend the first year or year and a half improving or adjusting soils in relation to the information we find on the soil test. Fertilizers. Fertilizers can be broken down into three distinct groups: organic, organic-based, and synthetic. Organic is fertilizers where everything in that bag comes from minerals, grains, plants, or animal byproducts. Nitrogen comes from grains, corn, soy, alfalfa, plants, cotton seed meal, or animal byproducts, manures and chicken feathers and things like that. Organic-based is some of the above organic, but it also has some either biosolids, which is sewage sludge, wastewater treatment, the compost that comes from wastewater treatment, which we never want to use, because that typically is high in heavy metals, if there's industry that feeds into it. But most importantly, heavy metals, but the more important factor is pharmaceuticals. So think about growth hormones, birth control, chemotherapy, antibiotics, all things that pass through our bodies, do what they have to do, and end up in the waste stream. That does not come out in the composting operation. That stays with the solid material. There's areas in Maine where ag land, beautiful, rich ag land, is gone forever. Because for 20 years, they were dumping the biosolids on all these ag farms as compost to enrich the soil. They are so loaded with PFAS now that they can never be used. And it all came to light because a conventional farm was sold to an organic farmer, and he went through his testing process to become certified organic. And the bad news came out, he had put his life savings into this, and it came out that you can't grow anything here. So all the PFAS discussion in agriculture and land management actually began in Maine. That was the tipping point for this big national movement of PFAS. And it came from biosolid compost, because they were just getting rid of it, and nobody knew, or if they knew, they didn't care. And so the pharmaceuticals, the metals, and the PFAS all in there. So, or urea. Urea is a synthetic fertilizer that's made as an artificial process. They take anhydrous ammonia and react it at 350 degrees and 3,500 psi, and react it with carbon dioxide, and it forms 0.600 nitrogen. But think of this, it takes 5 tons of petrochemical equivalent to produce 1 ton of fertilizer. So a 5-ton input of natural gas and petroleum to have 1 ton, 1 pallet of 40 bags of fertilizer, takes 10,000 pounds of petrochemicals. So not sustainable at all. Conventional agriculture uses roughly 15% of the petroleum that we use in the development of all the fertilizers and managing, the conventional approach to agriculture. So I actually worked with a company once that I was on a panel one time and talking about a manufacturer of organic-based fertilizers. And he leaned over and he said, we really just make them because people don't think organic's gonna work. So we put some of this stuff in there so they think it's gonna work. So it was a marketing tool. Synthetic is that Haber-Bosch process involving anhydrous ammonia. So that's how we define and look at the different fertilizers. Conventional fertilizer, synthetic, urea, inorganic, water-soluble, fast in, it gets in 48 hours. Maximum nitrogen release, if it's not coated to slow it down, is 7 to 10 days, and it's all gone in 4 to 6 weeks, and you have to do it again. Petroleum-based feeds the plant, leaves the soil as quickly as it gets in there. Peaks and valleys, too much nitrogen, not enough. Too much nitrogen, and that's a stress producer for a plant. Going from lush nitrogen to low nitrogen. If we had used a synthetic water-soluble fertilizer here in Boulder last week, and then we got this heavy rain we've had, which is unusual for you, I know, and you get this heavy thing, most of that nitrogen would already be washed away. It would either be in a river or a stream or in the creek or down into groundwater. Because 7 to 10 days, in that 7 to 10 day time frame, nitrogen is being released faster than the grass can even process it. Organic fertilizer, water insoluble nitrogen. Moisture doesn't have anything to do with the release. It's the microbes in the soil. So we need those microbes to break it down. Naturally slow release, measured growth, feeding the soil. Soil feeds the plant, works slowly, steadily, supports the biomass. It's readily available now, and it produces the expectation that we're after. So we're remembering that less is more. I'm an advocate of more frequent, low-dose applications rather than any single big-dose application. So we're applying it at lower rates than the industry suggests for their conventional fertilizer, because we know that it works slowly and steadily over time. So a synthetic fertilizer gives us those peaks and valleys. A fertility curve of organic fertilizer is a straight line, a little bit. Every hour, every day, week after week after week. So instead of getting that 4 to 6 week release from 1 pound of soluble synthetic, we're getting an 8 to 10 week release, slow and steady, little bit every day. And that's really what the plant wants to see. Proper mowing, keeping sharp mower blades, cutting 1/3 of the blade at a time. Using a mulching mower, leaving the clippings there, should never bag and remove clippings. Unfortunately, the concept of bagging and removing was created by the landscape industry, not by science. Every land grant turf school in the country tells you to recycle grass clippings, because recycled grass clippings can give you 1 pound of nitrogen. That's more than a fertilizer application. And it's broken down by saprophytic organisms, the decomposers in the soil, and it builds organic matter. So it's an entirely beneficial process. Same thing, composting the clippings right there on the lawn, rather than taking them off and putting in a pile and composting, and then going by compost and bringing it back to the lawn. That's one practice that needs to be adopted, and that's one thing that the industry needs to change. 3 inches is the ideal stress-free mowing height for cool season turf grasses, again, right out of the university. So leaving them on the lawn, and don't mow the grass when it's wet, because when it's wet and you mow the grass, you don't want to I understand the landscape contractor has to keep the schedules. But if it's pouring rain and they're in raincoats and on the back of a lawnmower cutting your lawn, I guarantee you more damage is being done to your lawn than benefit is being realized. So we adopt good watering practices. Most people think that water equals kindness. And I can absolutely tell you that water kills more plants than drought does. Because water on a lawn fills all those good air pockets that have oxygen with water, and the good oxygen is gone, and now we have anaerobic, and the good organisms decline, and the bad guys take over, and the lawn suffers. But it's so hard. One of the hardest things I have to do is to convince people not to water. And out here where water is a precious resource, you're very different. For me, my average rainfall is 48 inches a year, and very different than here. But even then, restricting water use is better for the plant material. So I don't have any irrigation system, I don't have any sprinklers. If a plant gets too dry and needs water, I get a hose and I put a little bit of water on there. And every plant has different water needs, but grass is not a water pig. So we can kill more grass with kindness. When I was in the greenhouse industry for all those years, one of my specialties was big hanging baskets. And I always said the customer's always right. And even when they're wrong, they're right. And that was just the way I approached things. So I sold one of these big things, and 20 years ago it was worth $100. So I told her exactly what location to put it in, and I told her exactly how to water it. 7 days later, to the day, she brought it back, dead as a doornail. I said, it took me 110 days to grow that, and you killed it in 7. So what did you do? Well, you told me if I watered it twice a week, I thought every day would be better. She killed it with water. So grass is the same way. Overwatering, very damaging. Compaction, biggest enemy of turf grass. That's downward pressure, whether it's pedestrian traffic, it's whether it's equipment, whether it's kids on the sports field, whether it's a walking path. Compaction takes out oxygen, squeezes it out of there. No oxygen, the turf grass root has to have oxygen. The microbes have to have oxygen. But if we have compacted soil, we've lost oxygen. weeds begin to grow because they can survive low oxygen when turf grass can't. So air pockets are gone, the turf grass system declines. So if we have bare spots, if we have hydro, if you think your lawn might be compacted, get a screwdriver. Simply walk out and push the screwdriver into the soil. If you can't get in more than an inch or two, you have a compacted situation. If you can easily poke in 4 or 5 inches, then you're probably pretty good. And you have a soil that will drain water, it will hold water, and it has sufficient oxygen. Down there at the bottom left, that's an aerator. And it can be done as a homeowner, it can be rented, or a landscape contractor can provide that service. It doesn't have to be done every year. It doesn't have to be done all that frequently. But if it's done occasionally, if we know we have a compacted situation, that will improve grass probably more than fertilizer will, because getting the oxygen in there is critically important. And then overseeding. The infusion of new seed into existing turf is injecting youth into a natural aging process. Believe it or not, one grass plant has only a lifespan of a year, 12 to 18 months tops, and that plant dies. The system is perennial, right? Your lawn comes back every year, but that's because you count on producing and making new plants every year, because the older ones die and we count on having new ones. So if we have bare spots in lawns, and you don't have time or don't have the ability to wait until the grass fills itself back in, a little bit of grass seed goes a long way in making that happen. So grasses here in Colorado prefer soil temperatures of 55 to 65 degrees, air temperatures of 65 to 70 degrees, 75 degrees. So when you get one of your 90-degree summer days, grass doesn't like that. Grass actually begins to shut down a little bit, because just like things shut down when it gets cold, things shut down when it gets too hot. In the spring, we get lots of blade growth. In the fall, we get lots of root growth. Every blade of grass that's used in every park, playing field, lawn, golf course, cemetery is all non-native. All came from Western Europe and the British Isles. The only native grasses are the ones that are not managed as manicured lawns. So you're growing a non-native species on your lawn that now we're trying to manage as a monoculture. So most horticulturists know that two things that are really difficult: managing non-natives and managing monocultures. And those are the 5 kinds of grasses that you have here: Kentucky bluegrass, perennial rye, and the fescue grasses. And those are the ones that are all the non-natives. So in lawns, for weeds in lawns, I call them misplaced plants. And they all have a function somewhere else. My partner, I do all this stuff in the landscape, but she said, there's 7 dandelions over there. We gotta get the dandelions up. I said, yes dear, but that's the first food for our pollinators. Now the guy next door is a complete unmanaged property. Millions of dandelions. If they come into my yard. Once that yellow flower starts to go by, before it gets to be the puff to release, I'll dig them out. I go out more next year, but they're gonna stay there to support the pollinators until that flower is gone, because that's really the right thing to do. And when you look here, you have wild violets, which is the thing. You have broadleaf plantain, could be a food source. So you have different things there that someplace else in nature. I had a great picture for one of the slide decks that I had, that I showed this beautiful, there's a type of viola called Johnny Jump Up, which is a little bit, one of my favorite little plants. And I started with 3 plants that I bought at a farmer's market. And I ended up with about 20 square feet of solid Johnny Jump Ups. And then over here on the edge of the driveway in the lawn was one lonely Johnny Jump Up. So now all of a sudden that guy's a weed in my lawn, and over here all the neighbors were going crazy over it. And then up in the back I had one clump of grass that was growing absolutely perfectly, because when we seeded the lawn, the seed must have gone in the garden bed, and now that's a weed in the garden bed, so I'm ripping out the grass from the garden bed to get rid of that weed, and somebody wants me to rip out the viola over here because it's not supposed to be in my grass. But that's where the plant wants to be, so you have to respect nature and where nature wants to go. So does clover have a place in a lawn? So as a grass guy, I'm not the guy that's gonna brand clover as a bad guy. A monoculture of clover, it can be dangerous in a sports game because it's very slippery. But interspersed, more and more we're seeing people intersperse clover at an appropriate level. They don't have to fertilize. Cut the grass, recycle grass clippings, you have clover there, you'll never buy another bag of fertilizer. Is that an appropriate expectation? Absolutely. So there is a place there. That's one of the landscapes that I've managed for quite a while. And there's clover right in that grass there. But does that detract from what we're looking at as a landscape there? Absolutely not. But yet that client would always come and say, you're gonna do something about that clover this year. I said, well, maybe Linda, we'll see what happens. But it's not gonna be my primary focus because it really isn't bothering anything. So, good or bad, it gives us nitrogen, gives us, it fixed that. It's definitely a positive in the landscape, but then again, it's public perception. So, in my position, I have to react in a way that the client dictates, but I'm not going to insist on clover removal. Top dressing with compost. These are compost piles that we've made ourselves over the years. We have one property where we compost all the yard waste on site. Never all complete, almost a closed loop on that piece of property. So 1/4 inch compost spread over grass, one of the absolute best things that you can do for a lawn if you're so inclined. Here's my daughter Kari here. She's dethatching a lawn. And you can see it. This is all, the same property here. That top left, that's my lawn at home. That's what it looked like 3 weeks ago in Maine with no fertilizer applications. It was just because there was an active microbial biomass there that woke up and decided to do its thing and give me that expectation when everybody else in the neighborhood had grass that hadn't even been broken dormancy, and we got to that. And then down in the bottom left there, those two pictures, that's what it looks like when you top dress a lawn. The results are what you see in the top picture. So how do I talk to my landscape company? Landscape companies can be broken down into 3 different groups. Lawn care companies that do the product applications, lawn maintenance companies that cut the grass and mulch the garden beds, and then landscape design and installation companies. So not too many companies do all 3 things. So it's very selective, and they choose their niche that they want to perform. So when we talk to them about organic management. Some have that as part of their service providing, and some don't. Unfortunately, too many are resistant, and it doesn't work. It can't do what it needs to do. One of our focuses in our company is education, and we've probably trained and taught 2,000 or 3,000 landscape contractors over the last 15 years, and embraced them to try to get them to incorporate an organic lawn care program within. We don't want to throw your conventional away. Just embrace organic and offer that service. But what happens when a client, and even in my neighborhood, when a client asks for organic lawn care, the first words out of the contractor's mouth was, it doesn't really work, but if you really want to try, I'll give it a shot. So that doesn't instill much confidence. There's a company up my way, and they promote that they do everything organically first. And if that doesn't work, then they do chemicals. But unfortunately, the first thing they do is synthetic fertilizer. So it's really not organic. So the industry is still a challenge to try to get them to come on board. My last slide, and I've shown this as closing in my presentation since 1998, that for me, trying to leave the planet in a little better place than I found it, and I've worked in it, and I've adopted this, that everything I'm doing is considering the impact of what I do now and how that works on the future and how it leaves things hopefully better, than when I started in this route 25 years ago. So with that, I think we can open it up to questions. If folks have questions, I can answer general questions or, as best I can, site-specific questions if you have something that pertains directly to your property.
years ago. I listened twice in the same year, both times that you came here. Thank you. And I buy an organic fertilizer, Alpha 1, and I put down the summer application in the summer, the winter in the winter. We've been aerating twice a year. Well, this year, a whole bunch of our lawn came up dead, the grass is dead, and I don't know if we're over-fertilizing or using the wrong kind at the wrong time. And what we haven't done is the top dressing with compost. And if that's what you think we need, my next question would be, if you go to McGuckins, there's about 8 different kinds of compost. So it would be, how do I know which one?
Okay, so you mentioned that you used the Alpha 1 as a winter. What time of the year did you do that, your fertilizations?
Yeah, we just put the summer application down about a week ago. And we do the winter one in, September?
So that's the right timing for your grass. Spring and fall
Right.
is the right timing. Depending upon which Alpha 1 product you purchased, it is alfalfa, but it's enhanced with synthetic nitrogen. So it's not 100% organic, but it's largely organic. But that wouldn't cause the death of the lawn. And at that fertility schedule, that's the appropriate schedule for here. So short of being able to look at it and see exactly what it looks like, one of the insects that can do that is not really prevalent in Colorado, but there have been outbreaks in the Denver area over the last 3 or 4 years. It's an insect that chews the root of the grass and causes the death of the grass plant. Somebody actually showed me a picture of that yesterday, and it was hard to tell from the picture exactly what was going on because it was on a cell phone. But back in my neck of the woods, if I had that symptom where all of a sudden lawn had died, that's the first place that I would turn. But again, because it's not that prevalent out here in the Front Range, I'm not going to go and say that is your particular problem. So what I would do at this point is again, doing the fertilization, in the recent past is the right thing to do. I imagine you still have some grass that still looks good, right? Still a portion of the lawn?
Yes.
So what I would do is do a brisk rake. You may not have to top dress the whole lawn. I'm not sure what products they have, at McGuckin to sell you as bags of compost, but a brisk rake and raking that, scratching it, getting rid of the debris that's there.
Power raking?
Power rake, yep. And then top dressing, and all you need is to rake on 1/4 to 1/2 inch, and just rake it on there, and then overseed it with a grass seed mixture appropriate for here, which for the most part would be Kentucky bluegrass, or ideally a mixture of Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass. And you should be able to recover that relatively short order, probably if you did that now, probably by the middle of the end of June.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. Thanks for coming out here. I feel like you're in a very different environment from where you're used to working. So I look forward to your insights on some of the challenges we face. One of the first ones that I'm wondering about is actually what you're just referring to, the grubs that we find, and we've had a lot of trouble with Japanese beetles. And so I'm pretty convinced that we've got Japanese beetle grubs, and they're killing sections of the lawn sort of 1 year at a time as they progress. And so I'm curious what kinds of actions we can take to eliminate that problem. And the other thing that, if I could ask a second question, would be how can we handle the fact that our sunshine is so intense that I think it really removes a a lot more water from our soil, and we might need a different approach. I mean, it'd be great if we had lots of shade trees, but we don't.
Mhm.
Thanks.
So grass is a full sun crop. Intense sun, like you get here, will draw water down. So then it is looking at some of the species of grass that are less water dependent than others. So the predominant grass that's grown out here is Kentucky bluegrass, because it survives your cold winters really well. But Kentucky bluegrass has a very high genetic demand for water. So that's the one that does not perform well. You know, is your lawn irrigated or not irrigated? Is it at the whim of nature?
We do have a sprinkler
Yeah,
system,
sprinkler.
and I try to run it longer periods for fewer times. But
Mhm.
it seems like if I don't run it every other day, it doesn't keep up.
So in the flanks of the season, you know, May and June, it doesn't have to be that frequent. Same thing with September through the middle of October. But once you get to your July and August, you might need to do it 3 times a week for a little bit longer time. Now, one of the things when I mentioned aeration as in turf grass, if I want to hold more water in my soil, I know that I can aerate and it will allow it to penetrate. That whole idea of top dressing with compost that builds organic matter, that organic matter is like a sponge and it holds water at longer periods of time. So you could, at CSU, do a really simple soil test for really $20, $25, and find out, you know, what your percentages of sand, silt, and clay are, and what your soil makeup is, and most importantly, your percentage of organic matter. So improving organic matter dramatically increases the water holding potential of the soil. So that would be, then you wouldn't be a slave to watering, because if you watered on a Monday and you improved organic matter, even in your climate here, you're going to make it until Wednesday without the thing completely crashing. So that would be the strategy. There's all kinds of science that shows that if you raise organic matter 1%, how much more water can be held in that soil. And that's really what it's all about, allowing water to penetrate deeper down into the root system. The other thing with Kentucky bluegrass is it genetically doesn't have a big aggressive root system. The fescue grasses need less water, and they have deep probing root systems. Now that's a cool season grass, and it would grow out here, but it's kind of on the edge of whether it's going to survive a really deep winter. So it's typically not used in the most northern regions of the country where temperature goes to 0 or below for extended periods of time. But the fescue grass is the most drought tolerant of all the grasses, and it has the deepest root system of all the grasses. Grubs, and you know, back to your question there about your dead grass when I said an insect, and I didn't even think about grubs. And that could be one reason why, if, you know, for your question, that could be something that you might have an issue. If you think that if you can't treat for grubs right now, but the time to treat is going to be in August, end of July, August. And if you think in that dead turf area, or in your case, you think you have the Japanese beetle grubs, you take an area and cut an area 12 by 12 by 12 and peel the lawn, the sod back. Then dig right down 6 or 8 inches and look for grubs. If there's less than 8 or 10 in a square foot, that's the threshold level for damage. So if you have 4 or 5 you find in there, just close it back up and leave them, and as they move around, they're going to aerate the soil for you. But if you get close to that threshold level, that's when you're going to get turf damage. I don't know if you'll find it in a brick and mortar store. You can certainly find it online. Essential oil of cedar wood. Cedar is a very potent insecticide, and you just drench that area with cedar oil. And it's a very low rate that you use. You know, you can find it. You can easily find it online. I've actually purchased it online, and there is a little bit of a disruption is an antifungal, so you get a little bit of disruption to the fungal. So you would follow that up with an organic fertilizer to build back the microbial community that you may have temporarily compromised. But cedar oil has a very good track record as an organic alternative to chemical grub control. Yep, I know one more question, we're coming close to time.
I don't know if I can sneak in two. One about, we have Resource Central. Are you familiar with that program where
No.
it's in the Denver metro area, and there are city grants that residents can apply for, and you can have turf removed and then buy garden in a box collections that are native and pollinators,
Okay,
and so you can apply the money towards the gardens and the turf removal. So we did a garden, and now we're doing turf removal to pull more grass up, and we're going to put in a variety of buffalo grass that's been, selected for turf management.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're wondering if you have any recommendations about that. We're going to do it by grass. And then the second one is your recipe for the molasses application.
Yeah. So molasses, if you take a hose end sprayer, 32-ounce hose end sprayer, and fill it with water and put in 3 or 4 ounces of organic black scrap molasses, unsulfured, that's going to feed, and then you just simply water the area with that for any type of plant material, not just grass, but everything that you're planting. Now with buffalo grass, are you going to do buffalo grass plugs?
No, we're going to do seed.
Okay, so seed, super expensive, but worth it in the long run. Very, very slow to establish. So you're going to have to do some manual weed management until you get established, but you would expect to probably invest a couple of years into that lawn, but there's a lot of conversion into more native areas with buffalo grass. We've been talking about that for the last 20 years, and it is catching on. And it is so, you'll be so much happier with that than struggling with the non-native managed grass. So I applaud you for that. That's great.
Chip, we just wanted to point out the guide, the organic turf guide that was created by the city of Boulder. It's on the People and Pollinators website, so that has a lot of tips, detailed tips in there, because I know you'll have some questions after the fact.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.